Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Sparkle English, where I help you improve your level of English. In today's video, I'm going to teach you the difference between direct objects and indirect objects. But before we get into that, let's briefly discuss subjects. So the subject of a sentence is the person, place, or thing that performs the action in a sentence. And the object of a sentence is the person, place, or thing that receives the action in a sentence. For example, my grandma baked cookies. My grandma is the subject of the sentence. She is performing the action of baking. And the object of this sentence comes after the verb. The object receives the action. The cookies are receiving the action of being baked. So this is quite simple. However, people can get confused on how to identify direct versus indirect objects. So let's talk about this in more detail. Objects are parts of a sentence that receive the action of a verb. However, there are two types of objects in English. We have direct objects, and we also have indirect objects. So how can you tell the difference? First, let's look at some examples of direct objects. A direct object is the thing or person that directly receives the action of the verb. And a direct object answers the questions what or whom following an action verb. For example, Jessica kicked the football. The football is a direct object. It answers the question what. What did Jessica kick? She kicked the football. Here's another example. I am reading a novel. Again, a novel is a direct object receiving the action of reading. So, what am I reading? I'm reading a novel. So, if an object can answer the question what or whom, it is a direct object. So, let's look at examples of an indirect object. An indirect object tells us who or what benefits from the action. It answers the questions to whom or for whom following an action verb. For example, David bought his mom a sweater. In this sentence, we have two objects. We have his mom and we have a sweater. So remember, we identify a direct object by asking what. So what did David buy? David bought a sweater. So we know a sweater is a direct object. But to whom or for whom did David buy a sweater? Well, he bought a sweater for his mom. So his mom is an indirect object. This sentence may also be rephrased. David bought a sweater for his mom. But usually in English, we will phrase the sentence like this, with the indirect object coming before the direct object. So let's look at some more direct comparisons of direct objects and indirect objects. Once again, a direct object answers what or whom, and an indirect object answers to whom or for whom. So for example, Mary baked a cake. Once again, what did Mary bake? She baked a cake. So a cake is a direct object. However, look at this sentence. Mary baked her friend a cake. So her friend answers to whom or for whom. For whom did Mary bake a cake? She baked a cake for her friend. So her friend is an indirect object, and a cake still remains a direct object. Another example, Jack sent a message. What did Jack send? He sent a message. So a message is a direct object. Whereas Jack sent his boss a message. To whom did Jack send a message? He sent a message to his boss. So his boss is an indirect object, and a message is still the direct object of this sentence. Another example, they brought brownies. What did they bring? They brought brownies. So brownies is a direct object. They brought us brownies. For whom did they bring brownies? They brought brownies for us. So us is an indirect object, and brownies is still the direct object. So how can you identify direct and indirect objects? Well, step 1 is to look for the action in the sentence, or the verb. And step 2 is to ask what or whom after the verb. The answer is the direct object. Step 3 is to ask to whom or for whom after the verb and direct object. And the answer is the indirect object. So let's look at this example. The children wrote their dad a poem. What's the action in this sentence? Well, the action is wrote. So now let's ask what. What did the children write? Well, they wrote poem. So we know a poem is a direct object. And to whom or for whom did they write the poem? Well, they wrote the poem for their dad. So their dad is the indirect object. Let's look at another example. Ben gave Julie a diamond ring. What is the action in this sentence? The action is gave. So now let's ask, what did Ben give? Well, Ben gave a diamond ring. So a diamond ring is the direct object. And to who or for whom did he give the ring? Well, he gave the ring to Julie. So Julie is the indirect object. So this is how you can identify direct and indirect objects when a sentence contains both of them. Now, it's important to note that some sentences contain only a direct object, and a sentence cannot have an indirect object without a direct object. For example, Mrs. Thomas painted a picture. In this sentence, we only have a direct object. What did she paint? She painted a picture. We know this is a direct object. Bethany played the piano. Again, what did Bethany play? She played the piano. So here are examples of sentences that only contain a direct object. So now it's time for our quiz. You must identify if the underlined word is a direct or indirect object. Number 1, Bobby gave his mom a hug. Number 2, Gemma lent me her book. Number 3, we wrote the teacher a kind note. Number 4, they showed us their new puppy. Number 5, I sent my best friend a postcard. And finally, number 6, the children read their new books. Okay, so number 1 is a direct object. Remember, with a direct object, we are asking what. What did Bobby give? Bobby gave a hug. So a hug is a direct object. Number 2 is an indirect object. An indirect object answers to whom or for whom. So, to whom did Gemma lend her book? She lent her book to me. So, me is an indirect object. And number 3 is also an indirect object. For whom did we write the kind note? We wrote the kind note to the teacher. So it answers to whom or for whom. Number 4 is a direct object. What did they show us? They showed us their new puppy. Number 5 is an indirect object. To whom did I send a postcard? I sent a postcard to my friend. And finally, in number 6, their new books is a direct object. This sentence does not contain an indirect object. What did the children read? They read their new books. Let me know in the comment section how many you got correct out of 6 and if you had any difficulties with this lesson. Thank you guys once again for watching, and I'll see you all in my next lesson.